Going on to 15, PressTV will be celebrating its 14th anniversary July the 8th under not-so-celebratory circumstances. On June the 22nd, 2021, the US seized the station's web domain. That's a reminder of how we have to be on our toes, not to avoid a fall, but to quickly control damage. PressTV.com was not the only target. Over 30 outlets linked to the anti-Israel resistance movement were shut down, although it's not that easy to block country domains, as that'll arouse international objection to undermining country's sovereignty. So the US effort will have been a wasted one. Iran just continues with its .ir domain. So feel free to search our content on presstv.ir. Not now, because I'm here now to demonstrate PressTV's challenges as well as its pros and cons. You're watching Iran Today with me, Leila Faramarzi. In addition to YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter, when not banned from them, PressTV distributes its content on its own IPTV called yourmedium.com. That's to be ready for anything, having been repeatedly targeted by the act of censorship by the US tech giant Google's YouTube service. On the matter of finding ways around US hindrance, our guest offers his insight. Dr. Masoudi is faculty chief at Surrey University. An old hand in the world of media, he offers insight into the why of actions taken, say, by the US.
Well, the first thing is that we anticipate what they want to do. When this foresight is there, we can take immediate action in case it happens. Fortunately, there are two important facets to the cyber world. The first is that there is a huge amount of information in circulation, and control, censorship, and other actions that would stop that flow aren't feasible. But they can monitor our data, and because there is no center to the internet, there is no command, and that's what enables us to relaunch our websites thanks to our technical and IT capabilities.
Excuses for taking PressTV off air or blocking it out of cyberspace traditionally tend to be feeble. The US Justice Department said 33 of the seized websites were used by the Iranian Islamic Radio and Television Union, which was singled out by the US government last October for what officials described as efforts to spread disinformation and sow discord among American voters ahead of the 2020 presidential election. Notices on the domains said the websites were seized as part of law enforcement action by the Bureau of Industry and Security, Office of Export Enforcement, which is part of the US Department of Commerce, and the Federal Bureau of Investigation. One would naturally conclude the US's motives had nothing to do with Iran having possibly broken media regulations, but were rather an extension of US sanctions against this country. Economic sanctions. I asked how it is that the supposed defender of freedom of expression just gets to block PressTV's coverage at will.
Behind Western democracy, the interests of multinational corporations are hidden. The European and American media basically rely on large multinational corporations. Some of these companies, for example, also produce home appliances. Unfortunately, I've heard recently that the head of the Home Appliances Union had complained that 400 containers of the devices were being brought into the country, many of which were products made by the same multinational companies that are shutting down our national television and radio. Their interest lies in influencing Iran's booming market and selling their products here.
PressTV was far from alone this time. Some other websites seized were Al-Alam newscasters as well as Al-Masira TV of Yemen. Also seized were Palestine Al-Yom, a Palestinian-directed broadcaster, Karbala TV, the official television of the Imam Hussein Shrine in the holy Iraqi city of Karbala, Iraqi Afaq TV, Asia TV, and Al Naim TV satellite television channels, as well as Naba TV, which reports the latest stories about Saudi Arabia and other Persian Gulf countries, as well as Bahrain's Lua Lua TV, a channel run by opposition groups with offices in London and Beirut. Mr. Abedini is a high-up figure in Iran's media world and a media analyst worth hearing out.
ما از اینکه نظام سلطه
We are not too surprised that the system of domination removes any voices that aren't theirs. If it accepts the voices to be heard, it would face a contradiction. That's because it's been portraying a picture of other nations that was a lie, and then its people would question them as to why they hadn't been showing them the facts. If it suppresses those voices, it would violate the principles of liberal democracy. But they've gone for the latter because they think it benefits them more.
PressTV's past experiences of interference with its flow of speech span a decade. On 20th January 2012, the channel's license to broadcast in the UK was revoked by Ofcom, the UK's media regulator. This was on the grounds that the company's editorial content and control came from Tehran. PressTV and its partners argued London offices of CNN International, Bloomberg and Al Jazeera all ultimately answer editorially to bosses in Atlanta, New York and Doha. Also, if real editorial control of the station was from Tehran and that was a problem, it would have been a problem also when the Ofcom license was first granted. Tehran maintained the Ofcom decision was a clear instance of censorship, and PressTV continued to broadcast in the UK via its YouTube and Facebook pages. Now, logic aside, here's some juicy information that will uncover the UK's ulterior motive. Courtesy of WikiLeaks, it came to light that 2 years earlier, the British government was reportedly planning to strike a blow at PressTV. That would be in 2010. This would be in retaliation for the blocking of Western satellite channels by Tehran, as Jeffrey Alderman put it. A proud Zionist, as he calls himself, he appeared on PressTV panel discussions and bore witness, "I have never been censored, nor has the company ever made the slightest attempt to get me to modify a particular view." Now, this voice of balance has been silenced, meaning PressTV.
با تناقضاتی که ما در دموکراسی نئولیبرال مخصوصاً
We're all familiar with the contradictions within the liberal democracy. People in London used to have access to your channel, PressTV, and the number of viewers there were growing fast. They couldn't tolerate this growing number of viewers and had to stop it by revoking the channel's permit on the basis of falsehood over some alleged complaint of a journalist who's detained in Iran, which of course doesn't have anything to do with that. It doesn't come as a surprise then. They try to impose limitations on any of our media that are influential around the world.
In early April 2012, the Munich-based media regulator BLM announced it was removing PressTV from the SES Astra satellite for having no license to broadcast in Europe. But PressTV produced documents showing it could broadcast under German law. And Munich's administrative court announced on June the 15th, 2012, that the ban was illegal. The ban, in other words, was based on false premises, no subjective misjudgment even.
در مورد آزادی بیان هم همینطوره.
The same goes for freedom of expression. They let bomb-making tutorials for Iranians be circulated, but don't accept the smallest move that would go against liberal democratic thoughts and immediately take the page down. They don't allow the photo of General Qasem Soleimani to be published, but there are tens of accounts belonging to Al-Qaeda and Daesh. How can they explain this contradiction?
The silencing trend went on again in 2012 with Eutelsat and Asiasat. Iran survived by striking deals with smaller companies in other countries. Then in 2012, Intelsat took PressTV off air along with several other Iranian channels for fear of US sanctions. Years later, from 2019, PressTV has found itself on and off social media platforms more than once a year even. In April 2019, PressTV reported that Google blocked its access along with Hispan TV, its Spanish-language sister channel, without prior notice, citing violation of policies without explanation. No explanation came as no surprise to PressTV, of course, as it believed it had not violated any of Google's listed policies. PressTV accused Google of censorship, as Google owns YouTube. Dr. Sepanji joined us by Skype. It was worth establishing even an online connection to hear his analytical views.
Countries have a set of domestic regulations that can be used for that purpose. There are international unions that we can use to make complaint. Most importantly, the ITU, which belongs to the United Nations, but that requires a team of experts who know the language of international law, are familiar with the legal frameworks and international conventions. All's not lost. We're dealing with private companies. We've seen what happens to private companies such as Google and Microsoft in Europe. Courts issue rulings that the companies are obliged to accept them and respect public opinion, protect privacy, and deliver the message to the audience.
Come January 2020, YouTube deleted the PressTV UK channel, which hosted hundreds of videos and boasted 28,000 subscribers. That was days after the US killing of Iran's top military leader, Qasem Soleimani, which suggests the real motive behind censoring Iran is to silence its inconvenient truths. Dr. Dabirimeh shares his views with us as a media analyst with a bird's eye view as he reviews all Iran's global media content.
I think PressTV successfully represented the demands, tendencies, and alternative thoughts in the United States concerning the US government and its politicians in specific periods. The American society is a huge pluralistic entity compared to the government, but the American media, like CNN, have reduced that huge society to the administration, the president, or the White House, as if they are the voices of the pluralistic American society. But that couldn't be further from the truth. There are numerous unheard voices in the US about a variety of different topics. In my opinion, PressTV has been very successful in representing them, attracting a large audience.
Time for a short break. We'll be back in no time. Come 2021 and the 6th and 7th rounds of the Vienna talks to revive the nuclear deal, Iran's PressTV's.com domain, among others, was seized by the US. This is while the talks are basically to clear the air between Iran and the US to get US sanctions lifted off this country and the deal going. But is it a surprise for once?
This goes back to the history of American diplomacy and the techniques they use in their negotiations. When they want to clinch a deal, contrary to popular belief, they tend to maximize pressure to grant the smallest concession and gain the biggest advantage. Iran isn't the only country targeted by this strategy.
PressTV reserves its right to pursue the case legally via domestic and international channels while switching to local domains in different countries it covers. The channel released a statement promising to carry on as the voice of the voiceless, sanctions or otherwise. It called the US seizure an act of terror against the world's public opinion and media robbery and dictatorship. This is while taking the ban also as a compliment, given it sees PressTV's accurate, timely and voluminous information dissemination on Palestinian efforts against Israeli usurpers and the latest war they imposed on Palestine as cause for this blocking of the web domain. PressTV and independent media supportive of the resistance are paying for continual failures the US and its allied regimes have experienced in the field, the statement continued. Also, to continue physically, there are requisites, the most important being to keep the channel's heart beating, or hearts beating rather, albeit with a hiccup in the beat. But before taking a closer look at the makeup of PressTV, let's see what other media outlets have to say. And here it is in words. Wired points to how a US seizure of websites poses a danger beyond today. The US takedown of Iranian media sites extends a thorny precedent. Free speech advocates raised concerns after the Justice Department seized more than 30 domains this week. It's really unclear why the US government acted on these particular sites and why now, or what their standard is for intervention, says Evelyn Dweck, a research scholar at Columbia University's Knight First Amendment Institute and a lecturer at Harvard Law School. One of the core principles of free speech rights is that government restrictions on speech should be transparent and justified, and that's not happening as much as it should. The contrast between how we talk about foreign disinformation and domestic disinformation in this space is really stark, she says. Foreign disinformation gets talked about with really militarized language, while domestic disinformation gets talked about in the language of speech rights. The reason this matters is that it means we don't demand the same level of transparency, justification, or oversight of enforcement measures when it comes to foreign speech. It's part of a wider trend since Trump's maximum pressure sanctions on Iran were implemented by taking down some Iranian sites by the Department of Justice and Treasury, as well as platforms like Twitter and Instagram taking down some users, says Narges Bajogli, an assistant professor of Middle East Studies at Johns Hopkins University School of Advanced International Studies. News Toolkit explains the distrust Americans have in the media. Americans' trust in media is lowest in the free world. The public will forgive the honest mistake, but those who seem to specialize in flitting around the edges of the truth have earned a distinction. A new report shows that US trust in the news media is the lowest in the free world. According to the Patriot Post, new data from Reuters' latest digital news report shows the degree to which Americans don't trust the MSM, at least in relation to people in the rest of the world. The US comes in dead last, ranking 46th out of 46. The mainstream media has denied their bias for years, and the viewing public became less trusting and more suspicious when what the MSM served up didn't square up with what the public knew to be true. That limited trust has eroded even further now that the media makes virtually no attempt to disguise its own partisanship. In other words, Americans don't trust the media because the media isn't trustworthy. We've got Tasnim News quoting Hassan Nasrallah. Hezbollah chief slams US seizure of resistance websites. The Secretary General of Lebanon's Hezbollah said the United States' recent seizure of website domains tied to pro-resistance media exposed Washington's false claims about democracy and freedom of speech. In a televised speech on Friday, June the 25th, Sayyid Hassan Nasrallah said these outlets play an important role in supporting the Palestinian cause against Israeli occupation and take a stand against US domination, sedition, and takfiris. That would be it for this segment, but do stay on. Thing is, Western bans aside, national TV's World Service hasn't been receiving its funding necessary for paying satellite service providers and for other payments. But as it turns out, enough of the station believes in its mission more than the money it gets to pass round. And this is a fall that should pass, given objection and at times action across the board by different guilds and groups, such as professors and MPs objecting to budget cuts.
متاسفانه این مشکلات لوجستیکی
Unfortunately, problems concerning logistics, finance, and support for overseas and international networks are due to a lack of understanding of media diplomacy, national information transfer, and branding on the international stage. We are suffering from this in our country. I'm not trying to say that we don't have people who can understand this, but they are a minority. Those who are tasked with decision-making, allocating budget, and even media and communications planning in the country don't have a clear understanding of these facts. They think these are liabilities, while they need to know that they are indeed investments.
And so the channel's hearts are at work. Those would be the newsroom and correspondence office or Tehran bureau. There's the website as backup with farther reach given its greater accessibility, and the programs department which holds it all up like a backbone with in-depth analyses of hard news topics. TV, of course, is a team effort and joint enterprise between the technical, academic and literary for a balanced political message to be aired and shared. Let's not forget foreign correspondents complimenting the Tehran bureau, etc., etc. There's so many people doing so much. PressTV has had a clear vision and mission from the start, and with the emergence of media diplomacy as a determining factor in shaping minds, it cannot abort now.
In general, I think we have been successful in planning for such channels, in identifying the audience and delivering the message to the target audience. There are some reasons for the shortcomings, including the removal from the satellite channels list or social media platforms of issues related to the sanctions, and so on. In my opinion, if these hurdles didn't exist, our overseas networks, which have been operating for several years, would be even more successful.
Since 9/11, Western bias has divided the media into two camps, purported PressTV at its onset: the Western camp and the one supporting extremists and Al-Qaeda. PressTV came about during the US's round of retaliatory attacks on regional countries, Afghanistan then Iraq, because Iran was automatically being encircled by US forces while its peaceful nuclear program was coming under attack. So it set out to give a second eye to Western audiences to promote an Iranian perspective of the world based on truths on the ground in West Asia and America specifically.
In my opinion, the English language media in Iran have two chapters on history. One coming before the overseas networks, and specifically the PressTV network, and one after it. Before that, their reach was very limited. They mostly targeted Tehran-based embassies and businessmen staying in hotels or those who visited Iran. That was a very limited reach. But the overseas channels started to snap Iran's image on the global stage. First kicked off by English-speaking Sahar channel and later continued by PressTV.
If the US removes Iran's voice from satellite channels and social media, how does it deal with the voices of the people of China, Russia, Venezuela, Bolivia, Lebanon, Iraq, Syria, and others? Even if it suppresses all those voices, what would it do to the people of the US who are saying, "I can't breathe"? How will it silence that voice unless it literally kneels down on the necks of every single person and suffocates them to silence the voices? Unless it makes the impossible move, it seems that the voices will continue to be heard.
It's not just thwarting Western media and political propaganda away from Iran by unveiling what was actually a US-allied occupation of the Middle East or West Asia, but sounding the concerns of the voiceless everywhere. PressTV prides itself for having given Iraqis a voice in objecting to a US occupation and presence in their country, for example. Launched in 2007 as Iran's first 24/7 international English-language news channel, PressTV presents world news round the clock, as well as some 15 programs made here in Tehran alone and documentaries, never mind chat shows by its London company, and news coming in faster and more accurately from its foreign bureaus. 5 bureaus in some of the world's most important cities, London, Beirut, Kabul, Damascus, and Baghdad, help PressTV in this mission, as well as covering not just the most important stories, but also the most underreported stories.
I think these networks can have a wider international presence. They can use independent experts from around the world. There is no denying that the correspondents at the scene of the incidents are doing fine. They're using local and international reporters, but it's still not enough. I think they need to increase their potential by 30 to 40%. Of course, interactions with the world's greatest channels could also prove useful, especially in terms of the training of human resources and interacting with different networks around the world and being present at the scene of events.
PressTV personnel have given their lives in efforts to find out and/or air the truth. Maya Nasir, Saeed Farhad Taqaddusi, Habubullah Hossainzada, and Serena Shim made the sacrifice in revealing what is withheld from a global audience. And this news network continues to operate round the clock in spite of sanctions and blocks and loss of human resources. At its peak, PressTV had 100 foreign correspondents in about 80 countries with a more energetic, happier staff at home, all to present an alternative view of world news. If you think your friends are also interested in that, tell them to support the alternative message by watching alternative media. Thanks for being with us for our anniversary. Till next week, bye.